How's everyone doing today?
Good.
Is the mic on? Can you hear back there? All right. It's 11, so we'll go ahead and get started. This session is called Tribal Knowledge and Agile Teams. Has anybody ever heard of tribal knowledge? A few hands. All right. My name is Jeffrey Miller. I'm a senior consultant with Manifest Solutions. I have historically done Microsoft development, full stack developer, web database, all the stuff in between. I'm also certified in Neo4j graph database. And right now I'm working as the continuous delivery lead. And in addition to that, I've done some conference speaking. And recently, I've become a children's author. We did a children's book a couple years ago as part of our adoption process. And we used a Kickstarter. So if there's any Kickstarter backers that backed our project, thank you in the audience. I'm also a new dad. So, here I am in midlife and I've got a 1-year-old. So learning lots of new stuff, lots of teachable moments for me and for him. So, okay. So since this is a tribal knowledge talk, this is going to be my only slide. So we're just going to talk about it and make sure you don't take any notes. And when you get back, just tell a few people what you learned, and that's it. So there's nothing to show here except I'm totally lying. So there are slides, and the slides will be available on the web afterwards. But I want you to imagine for a moment that you are starting a new job, or you're new to a project team, and you're setting up your changes. Maybe you're doing development, or there's some work product that you're producing. And you get ready to turn it in, and you hit the submit button. And then about 10 minutes later, someone walks by your desk and says, I know you thought you were doing it okay, but actually you're doing it wrong. And sorry, we didn't tell you this, but now we got to tell you. And you're like, wait a minute, I would have tried to do it right if I'd known what you expected. So really all you can do is kind of shrug and say, sorry. But when that happens, you're kind of in a situation where it puts you in a bad spot. So you might be feeling like embarrassed or frustrated, or maybe even angry, because they did you a disservice by not telling you what you needed to do. And of course, they didn't hand you the guidebook when you walked in, because there is no guidebook. But that's when you need to stop and realize that it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's the fault of the process. It's the fault of the people that you're working with. So just turn to your neighbor and say, it's not your fault. Can you do that? It's not your fault. Okay, so you can breathe a sigh of relief. We want to avoid all of these situations. But so the thing about tribal knowledge, the definition of tribal knowledge is knowledge that's known to inside the tribe, but not outside the tribe. That's a Wikipedia definition. So that tribe can be big or small. It could be a work group that you're in. It could be a team of developers. It could be something that different groups within your development team knows, like maybe the developers know something that the testers don't know, or vice versa. And the thing is that what you don't know can hurt you. You can cause defects, you can have all these bad situations, or what you don't know can benefit you if you discover it. We can have situations where mistakes that could have been prevented had you had the right information. We get defects that go all the way to production before anybody realizes that they didn't tell you what to do to prevent that. And when we have incomplete information, we often get mediocre results. So the problem a lot of times with tribal knowledge is that the person that knows the stuff isn't available, or maybe they were taken away. Maybe they were there for a while, but they were taken away. So when someone quits their job, we've got the person that works on the function that does the thing with the stuff. He's the thing with the stuff guy. And oh, look, he got a great job. So goodbye. And then, as that door closes, you go, wait, can you stop and tell us how to do this stuff you did? There are costs with leaks of knowledge. You can be waiting for answers. That's a type of waste, right? In Lean and Agile, waiting is a type of waste. My last assignment as a consultant, we had one guy that knew the system. He knew every part of the system from top to bottom. But because of that, he was always in meetings. And if you needed to get an answer to a question, you had to wait till he was out of the meeting. And then you could find him, hopefully before he went to pick up his kids. It was like this small window of about 10 minutes where you could get answers to your questions. You can get defects because you put in things that don't meet standards. You can have outages because things weren't communicated. And speaking of standards, how about security? Has anyone ever run a scanning tool on their code base? Security scanning tool? Those are very helpful, and they tell you all these great lessons. But when they tell you the lessons, they tell the person that's reading the report. They don't tell the entire team. And you have to make sure that you communicate these things. What often happens, another form of waste, is rework. So if you have to go back and redo what you did and undo it and then redo it, then that takes time and money. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is to make sure that we don't keep repeating these mistakes. And so you have to come up with some principles and some strategies to capture and maintain and leverage that knowledge that you have. You may not realize you have it, but you do. And with those insights, you can transform the stuff that we work with every day into relevant resources. So why is this so hard? I mean, why is it that we have all these knowledge gaps in our work? I mean, we're experts, right? We went to college or we got some kind of higher training. We've been in this field for a while and people trust us to know what we're doing. Why is this so hard? Well, you can't know everything. No single person can know everything that needs to be known. So there's always some unknown beyond a person. And there are types of knowledge that are not easy to transfer in writing or in a document. So as a new dad, I've got now a year of changing the diaper exercise, right? So people will tell you that, you got a boy, so be careful because there might be some cannon fire that happens occasionally. So you take measures, but you don't really, you go, oh, okay, that's great, until you get shot a couple times. And then you're like, oh, I get it. And so there's a difference between telling somebody and then them experiencing it and learning it for themselves. And also experts, once they get to a certain point, they may kind of pass the threshold of being able to explain it well. It may be so internalized that it's going to be hard for them to write it down. And sometimes you don't want them to spend the time just writing documentation. So another reason we run into difficulties is because with Agile, the Agile Manifesto says that they value working code over comprehensive documentation. So everybody says, oh, Agile, we don't do documentation. There's a little clause in the bottom that says, while we value things on the right, we value the things on the left more. So they never said don't do it. They just said, they're not equal things, and working code is the important part. So, misconception. And there are no silver bullets, right? Every day in work, you're going to have these issues come up. So, we can sit in a session like this, and I can give you 10 ideas, and you go apply 3 of them, and things improve, but there's still going to be that. So you got to keep being aware of it. So what's in the way? Well, we have systems that we use, maybe SharePoint or some other system, maybe a knowledge base. Often the knowledge that's been put in these products is disorganized. they're just kind of made up every time. Somebody puts whatever they think in is good, and then a couple months later, maybe somebody else will drive by and do something. Or maybe they're managed by someone else. Maybe you can't really adopt them fully because, that's the SharePoint department's problem, Or maybe you're waiting on permission to get access to see the documentation that's supposedly there. SharePoint has this nice, talk to the hand, but click the button to kind of ask permission. So that is handy, but or maybe it's not managed at all. Maybe you're kind of doing it on your own, and that gets unwieldy. So the result ultimately is that even if we have these resources, we start to lose faith in them. So one of the things that my last team dealt with was there were so many SharePoint sites, and they were in such varying conditions that we stopped trusting SharePoint at all. It's like, it's in SharePoint. Okay, end of conversation. Don't tell me it's in SharePoint, because that's kind of like, Krispy Kreme, glazed eyes. That's the end of the conversation. So when do leaks happen? Well, they happen in a lot of scenarios, maybe some obvious and some not so obvious. So when somebody leaves their job, that's an obvious case where someone that knew the thing with the stuff, they walk out the door and all that knowledge in their head goes with them. But what about when somebody gets promoted? So everybody's happy, hey, good job, you're still moving on, or maybe you're moving into a different role, maybe you're doing management and not doing the functional work anymore. Here's a big one, retirement. My last client, we had a situation where all of a sudden the system stopped working as expected, and the quote to us was that the FTP reset script that reset expired accounts had stopped working, and it was set to reset the password every 3 months so it would keep working. And the guy had retired like 5 years ago, and nobody knew the technology that it was written in. And so they were begging our team to take on that responsibility. It could be as simple as someone being out sick for the day. Maybe, the part of the system is down and the person handling that, she's out sick. Or maybe she's having surgery, right? Out of commission for a couple weeks. Could be as simple as that. Family emergencies, or just being in meetings all day. I mean, if you're waiting on somebody and they're not available and they're the only one that knows it, then you're in trouble. Or worse, we recently had an email that says, "Hi everyone, my apologies for the delay. Unfortunately, the original technical point of contact passed away unexpectedly earlier this week. Until his replacement is named, we will need to use the other point of contact for the project. Please let me know if there's anything else needed." It's kind of sobering that, we talk about bus numbers, right? What's your bus number in that area of knowledge? Well, if it's 1 and they get hit by a bus, then you're in trouble. But it could be something more serious. It could be, terminal illness. You might see it coming, you might not. So knowledge is worth capturing, and I always try to soak up as much as I can. So the first strategy is to be a sponge. When you're looking around in your daily work activities, you get email, you get requests for work, maybe from an ITIL management system, like ServiceNow. And so the trick is to start with yourself. So what I do is I do bullet journaling. Has anybody heard of bullet journaling? Do you like it? Is it good? So it's just a notebook, and it's a way to keep notes. But the idea is that I'm trying to capture things so I don't lose track of them. And if you don't capture them, then it's game over anyway. So if you've got ideas for improving the system or improving your processes, the first step is to capture them. So for personal capture, we got journaling, note-taking. We've got OneNote. Does anybody use OneNote? A lot of people. That's great. I use Evernote as well. That's kind of more of a personal tool. You can use simple Word documents. I mean, it doesn't have to be complicated. Just open up a topical document and start taking notes. Email yourself, the note to self kind of approach. It does work. I've found that sometimes just opening up a draft in Outlook is helpful because it automatically saves. So if my computer shuts down, it's still there when I get back. Whiteboard photos, I take them all the time. I've got a tool called Cam Scanner that will deskew them and make them nicely readable. So if you ever need to take a whiteboard photo, that's great for that. Mind maps. I love to use mind maps to do outlines. And, I organize some of the materials for this talk using a mind map. So if you've ever seen a mind map diagram where it kind of spiders out from the center, that's what that is. FreePlane is a great open source free tool for that. One of the big things with Agile teams and teams in general is we need to review and reflect on what we've done recently and whether it worked or not. So I think retrospectives are important, and I think this should be more than ceremony. Some of the teams I've been on, they whip out the Sharpie and the pad of paper, and they say, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what could we improve? And we spend 15, 20 minutes going around the table, okay, what do you think, and that's it. It doesn't go back into the planning, it doesn't affect our backlog, and it should. And it's meant to provide feedback into your process. And that's one of the things that helps the process improve. One example of that is NASA. NASA has had some amazing accomplishments. We put a man on the moon, but they've also had some astounding failures. 2 Challenger disasters, or 2 space shuttle disasters. People died. I mean, these are milestones or moments in our country's history, and they're sad ones. And it's because mistakes were made. But what they've done is they've implemented a lessons learned database, a lessons learned knowledge base. And so they've intentionally taken steps to learn from their mistakes. One thing that I advise people to do is to name your lessons. Give them some kind of title that gives them an anchor in your mind. Don't let a bad project be bad ambiguously. Oh man, that was terrible. I hated that one. That was the worst 6 months of my life. Okay, why? Tell me about it. Tell me specifically what you learned from it, from all that misery, and then name it and do it as soon as it's happened, right? Like, don't wait 6 months to look back on it. Do it as it's happening. Say, you know what? I think there's something going on here. Maybe I could start to learn from that during the process. The DevOps Handbook has a chapter in there where it's called Turn Local Discoveries into Global Improvements. It's chapter 20. And one of the things that they talk about is holding blameless postmortems. If you have a production outage, or if you have some kind of downtime in your system, they bring all the people together, and there are certain companies that have done this that they've studied case studies on, and they put all their heads together and they swarm on the problem until they figure out what caused it, do root cause analysis. And by policy, some of these companies will not consider the production incident closed until they do that retrospective, that blameless post-mortem. They're not looking to point fingers. They're looking to establish root cause and avoid it in the future. And then they capture that knowledge in a way that other people, like NASA has done, can learn from it. So another thing that I like to do is improve how I capture. Has anybody ever used Snagit or Screenshot Tool, anything like that? So with screenshot tools, I mean, there's nothing like going in and saying, okay, look, here's what's happening right now. I can talk to you on the phone, I can describe it, but having a picture of it in an incident report or something makes it so much easier. And I think that's an important skill to hone. I use GreenShot a lot, it's free. And they have features that let you draw on the screen and annotate it. So first you snap it and then you annotate it, and those extra little notations make a big difference to whoever is downstream. So another area where I think we missed the right way of doing things is finding information. It's really frustrating when I'm searching for something in SharePoint or anywhere else and it's like no results found. How do I need to massage this search? You know, my Google foo is pretty strong at this point, so I know that I can put together some good search terms, but discoverability in your knowledge capture is going to be key. Put things where they can be found. This is a big one. I worked at a client where they said, we said, do you have coding standards? And they said, yeah, it's in SharePoint. I know I'm going to beat on SharePoint a lot today. And I started looking for it. I'm like, where are they at? Where are they at? And I finally went and talked to the person that was the driver behind the standards. He said, oh yeah, they're in there. And he gave me the link, and it turns out that the top level folder structure, the top two folders were public and private. And the standards that's supposed to be shared with everybody is under private. So I'm like, well, I wouldn't look under private. That's private, you know. Why would I look under there? So I said, well, what does public and private mean in this case? He's like, oh, public is for everybody in the company. Private is just for IT. I'm like, oh, okay. I would have never guessed, you know, put it in places where it makes sense. Spell correctly. You ever see those red squiggles in your tools? If you're typing and you see a red squiggle, go back and look at it for a second, because if I spell a word differently than it's normally spelled and then I search on the right spelling, if your search tool isn't that great, it's going to say, I got nothing. So fix your spelling errors when you can. Avoid acronyms. I've had several occasions where somebody's just like, okay, we need an ABC with an XYZ, and hit enter and save it. And you know, that acronym may be one that only a couple of people on the team have been using. You know, like we had BI. Well, what's BI? Business intelligence, right? No, it's banking instance. There it is, right? Or BF is break fix, or it's bulk filing. It could be either one. And so you don't know when, you know, why am I going to search for BF to get bulk filing if I think it's break fix, right? So jargon is another thing. There are terms that people may not understand if they're new to the team, so they're not going to know to look for that special word. Link from other places, like single point of truth is an important concept. So, you know, if you can have one place instead of fragmenting it all over the place and having too many places to search, just make sure you leave little breadcrumbs around. And pick good standalone titles. We have, I've used TFS for things, and TFS kind of has a hierarchy of user stories, and under that you have tasks and you have features and all these different things. And a lot of times what we do is the team would put in a user story and then they'd add a task, and the task title would be, you know, add database schema. Well, if you have 10 user stories and you have to add database schema on each of those 10 user stories, and you see that by itself, you're like, okay, add database schema. You've got zero context to fill in the details, so make sure you pick good titles that stand alone. Sometimes when you're in a situation, there is documentation, but it's super old. It's way out of date, and so you got to ask yourself, what do we do? Well, I think that, you know, the field of archaeology can tell us something. This is a trip I took to Belize for my honeymoon a few years ago, and what this is showing is an area that is it's flat in the middle, and it looks like it has bleachers on the sides. Now, this was in a Mayan temple in Belize. Cajal Pesh is the name of the site. And the tour guide told us, he said, he was explaining what it was. He says, "We think this was a ball court. We're not really sure, and we don't know what the rules were." Great. It's like sometimes you're in a situation where you've just got zero details, and all you got is the document in front of you. You kind of scratch your head, but you got to kind of count the cost and say, is it worth it? Sometimes you find a real gem in there, and you can do something with it, even if it's as simple as taking just a single page out of a document. I've taken PDFs and used tools to split them apart, and then recombine them, taking just the good pages as like a new document, and that's all it's good for. Sometimes you can look at a 5-year-old document like a database schema, and it's way out of date. It's like 10 features ago, but it can give you a little bit of insight as to how the system is structured. Now, being on SharePoint again, I like to say SharePoint is where information goes to die. I later changed that to Shareberia, where information goes to starve and then die. So I'm mostly kidding about SharePoint, but I have run into plenty of frustration with it. A lot of it goes fallow, it's not maintained, or it's up to each team to maintain their own, and they do it all differently. But you can go into SharePoint and start digging around. One of the features that SharePoint does have is a wiki. It's not my favorite wiki, but one of the benefits to the wiki in SharePoint is when you're building in those links to things, you can actually browse to other documents that you found in the system through SharePoint's browser. So it makes it a lot easier to build in the links to real resources and not have the not founds. Another thing that I like to do is to scavenge on team members' hard drives. Everybody's got that script or that document or that really cool thing that they've created, but it's only on their machine. It's in their user folder, it's locked away in some kind of corner of their machine, and we want to grab all these things and centralize them. So I think, just as an exercise, it's a good idea to inventory. When somebody says, "Oh yeah, I fixed that problem, I wrote a script for it, it was cool, it worked. If it ever happens again, I can pull it out and use it." Oh, wait, stop, that's a clue. Share it with the team. Grab it, centralize it, put it in a safe place on source control. What a big thing that we can do to manage tribal knowledge is make sure that we're setting people up for success when they join. So onboarding, I use it in a number of ways. One is when they join the company. I think people have different perceptions of what onboarding means. When people join the company, they've got all the HR paperwork. Okay, great. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about whether they're joining the 401k plan or if they're doing the health benefits. Not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is everything that you need to know to be successful in the context that you're in. Anybody ever drive a U-Haul? Did you like driving a U-Haul? Not really? Well, when my wife moved down to Ohio from out of state, I had the pleasure of driving my first U-Haul. And I drive an automatic. It's a sedan. It's got 4 doors. It gets me from where I am to where I want to be. Not a truck driver. So this is the tail of the tow haul mode. Anybody know what tow haul mode is? If you do, don't shout it out. This is a secret. It's the big suspense. All right, so the question is, what is this light? It says tow haul, right? So I'm like, all right, so I'm driving down the road, and it's like, man, this thing is slow. It's even got this efficiency meter on the dashboard that tells you how well you're doing on gas. When you coast, it says, hey, you're green. It rated my gas mileage at about 8.9 miles per gallon. And this is in 2000 when gas was not cheap, okay? Not 2000, but 2013, 14. It was like $3 plus a gallon, and I had to fill the tank up a couple times over the course of a 200-mile trip. So I'm like, why is this thing so slow? And I'm returning the truck to the drop-off point, and about 7 miles before I get here, I see this button that says tow haul mode. I'm like, wait a minute, I saw that light on the dash. What happens when I hit this? So I hit the button, and it goes. All of a sudden, my truck is performing, just fine. And I'm like, well, why didn't they tell me about this when I got the truck? They said, here's where the light to the back compartment is. Here's all the, make sure you fill it up to 3/4 of a tank if that's what we gave you, and all that stuff. But they did not tell me what tow haul mode was. So I did a search on their website, and if you can imagine searching uhaul.com for the words tow or haul, you might have a hard time getting some good results. So I switched to Google. Google has this wonderful site search where you can search it from the outside, but say only search this website. And I didn't find anything on what tow haul mode was, but I found user reviews about their experience with U-Haul, and what they said was, good service, truck worked okay, although the light for tow haul was on the entire time. 5 out of 5 stars, so I guess they were okay with that. Clear instruction on the how and why of tow haul indicator light. It pops on as a default and greatly increases gas consumption if one isn't hauling a trailer or pulling a car. 5 out of 5 stars, I guess they were okay with that. The staff was friendly. I wish the tow haul feature would have been explained to me in the beginning. 3 out of 5 stars. And then finally, my favorite, and this was like on the second page of results. I had to dig for this one. I got into the truck and started it. The tow haul light was on. I called the office before I left the parking lot to ask what the light on it was for. And the man in the office explained it to me without making me feel stupid. That's what good onboarding can do. And every time I go to rent a U-Haul now, I say to the person at the desk, I said, do you know what tow haul mode is? Do you make sure you tell people what tow haul mode is whenever they rent the truck? Because every time you turn it on, every time you start it, it turns back on by default, and it's a gas hog. So I was at a gas station 3-4 weeks ago, and I'm already gearing up for this talk, and somebody pulls in beside me with a U-Haul. I'm like, yes, I get to have a conversation with them about what tow haul mode is. And so I talked to him. I said, hey, does the tow haul mode light come on for you? And he's like, yeah. And I said, you don't need it if you're not pulling a car. So anyway, good onboarding is important, and there are plenty of things that we can do to improve the experience of a new team member. I was on a project a few years ago where we had one developer join the team, and they joined from another team. So you're like, oh yeah, they already work for the company. It's great. They know what they're doing, so they should be fine. Well, this developer was building a new feature all by themselves, and eventually he got to where he was merging in the changes. And after a 2 or 3 month period, we looked at it and we're like, wait a minute, you didn't use any of the standards we follow. You didn't use our frameworks. You went and did this, whatever the latest, greatest ASP.NET trend was at the time. He's trying all the new stuff. And yet it was totally inconsistent. And I thought, that's not on him. That's on the leadership, because they should have been bringing him in and helping him be successful. And so I think that, when a new team member joins, check in on them. Say, hey, how's it going? How are you doing coming up to speed on this? And then look at their work a little bit, right? Not to micromanage, but the first few times to kind of put it closer together. And then after they're pretty acclimated, just spread it out. Git source control has the concept of a pull request. And had we been using that, that's a tool that you can use. Somebody else would have seen what he was doing. Another strategy is to use checklists. I love checklists. I wish I used them more. Often I have them and then I forget to use them. So I need a checklist to use my checklist. The book that I have found incredibly useful is called the Checklist Manifesto. It's by Atul Gawande. Has anybody heard of it? No? Awesome. I have an extra copy of it with me, and I may figure out some random way to give it to somebody here in a bit. But he's a surgeon, and he was kind of thinking through why surgeries have such random outcomes. People die all the time, not from the condition they were operated on. They die from the complications. Why is that? And so he was looking for solutions to improve outcomes. And so in his research, he went clear back to the origin of checklists. And not the origin of checklists, but the primary influx of them into our society was, I think one of the aircraft manufacturers had introduced this great new model, and they were demoing it for all the military bigwigs, and they had their best pilot and best crew on it, and they went to take off, and it crashed within 40-some seconds, killing half the crew and the star pilot. And so they went back to the drawing board. They said, well, we're not going to scrap the plane. What we're going to do is make sure we have the right steps and safety checks in place to prevent this from happening again. So the whole raft of airplane checklists was born at that point. Make sure you unlock all the parts of the airplane that need unlocked, and make sure you've got all your stuff in order. Sully. Does anybody remember the story about Sully landing an airplane in the middle of the river? That was done by checklist. Within a period of a few minutes, they made some quick decisions, and they went and they pulled their checklist out of the where they keep them, and the co-pilot and the pilot worked together. They had to make some snap decisions that weren't listed. One of the things that I like about this book is it has some of those checklist examples in the back. And one of the key parts on the checklist in bold print, it says, the title is Engine Failure During Flight. First, check your airspeed, and then second, fly the airplane. Let's keep this in mind when we're checking boxes, So it does actually tell, and then it has the rest of the steps. So one thing that is important with checklists is there's two kinds. There's do confirm and read do. So in the read do checklist, you go one step at a time, you read it and do it. In the do confirm style, you do all your stuff and then you go, did I do this? Did I do this? Okay, great, I did all this stuff. So what we often see with checklists that's a bad approach is to make it into a step-by-step instructional tutorial down to the nth degree, when really a do confirm checklist style would be preferred. And so Dr. Gwande was part of a World Health Organization initiative to come up with a safe surgery checklist, and this is a picture of that. And after all the many procedures that they could have considered to put on the list, they came down to like about 19 items that were key for avoiding complications in surgery. And it's simple, it's one page, it has pause points. Pause points are crucial because they give you a moment to say, before we proceed into this next vital step, let's make sure we haven't missed anything. So the three big steps that they identified were before the patient goes under anesthesia. Administering antibiotics before a surgery is important, and you have to time it within an hour of the surgery, so that made sure that they wanted to hit all those. They want to make sure the patient doesn't have an allergy before they get started, and do they have enough blood from the blood bank available if there's some risk of bleeding. And then the next point where they pause is before they do make the incision. So they're like, do we have the correct arm? Are we, amputating the right arm or the left arm, right? That's backwards. Use a Sharpie, right? So, and then before the patient leaves the operating room, they inventory all of the instruments. Did we get everything? Is everything ready to go? So, some big points with that. Stick to one page. Use dark text on a light background if you can. It has to be readable. It can't be tiny print. And they're not a tutorial. They're not designed to teach someone stuff they don't already know. Experts can use them, and they should use them. One of the quotes from the book that the aeronautical person said is that checklists cannot fly an airplane. You still need the expert to do it, but it helps them avoid mistakes. Another strategy that I like for knowledge management and managing know-how is to ask the right questions. In Agile, we have the definition of done. And the definition of done is really a question, is it done yet? Well, okay, answering that question is made up of a lot of components. And as you're going through your daily work, having the right questions is sometimes more important than the actual answers. It's continually asking that. One thing that I think about a lot of times in team settings is communicating decisions. We meet in the hallway, we say, I get this problem, hey, ask so-and-so, and they say, let's put our heads together, okay, we'll do this. That was 3 people, and your team is 12 people. Now you got to communicate it to the rest of the team, potentially. How do you handle that? And one of the ways that you can do that is have a mental note to say, who have I missed in telling what just happened? Is it an important decision? And don't just send an email one time or maybe say something and stand up. I might not be there on that day, right? And they're like, we said it in stand up. Didn't you hear us? And it's like, no. Use as many methods as it takes. Email. Email is huge. I get information that's valuable in email all the time, but it's jammed in the middle of a thread, which is messy. Do we know if people read it or not? Well, maybe. And our inboxes get so full of junk that, I don't know, I'm not very good at email, so I should be the poster child for needing to transform it. And then retention limits may make the information that you had go away, right? Some companies, after 2 years, that information is gone. I've been on projects for 4 years where I needed what I had before 2 years ago. So to make email work, I use 2 specific categories of knowledge base and onboarding whenever I see something that would apply to that. So if I get an email that says, hey, the server names for the test environment are ABC and 1, 2, 3, then I tag that as knowledge base. Or if I get an email that's, somebody new would want to know this, I tag it as onboarding. And Outlook has quick steps at the top of your toolbar that can make this a breeze. You just tag it what you want it, and then it files it. And then there's something called search folders in Outlook. Anybody use search folders? Okay, that's good. So search folders look like this. You can create conditional folders and put them in your favorites, knowledge base and onboarding, that basically will look in your entire mailbox. You can use any folders you want for your email, but as long as it's tagged with those categories, they're going to show up, and that's a good resource. Email, you should automate common responses and infrequent requests. Sometimes you do something so seldom that you forget what you're supposed to say, how it's supposed to go. So using email signatures can help with that. A lot of people just use email signatures to put their thanks and their phone number or whatever in there, but you can actually put entire bodies of messages if you want. Send to OneNote in Outlook, I love it. It is a massively underutilized feature where you get an email, but you want to transform this into a shared resource, and so sending it to OneNote can help. Automate your knowledge. One of the big DevOps concepts is to take things from a manual process to an automated process. And one of the ways that they do that is to use chatbots to do deployments. I think GitHub has a chatbot that can launch off build pipelines, and everybody's just in on the chat. And so the chat is actually where they launched the build, and then that chat history is kept. One strategy I like to use is what I have recently called inspector views. And what I mean by that is in the database, we'll find a condition, there's a data problem. Well, instead of going, oh, look, there's this problem, come up with a fix on my hard drive, and then, move on. Well, we want to track if that problem still exists. So I create database views, and I give them a name that describes what the problem was, and I put in comments to say, hey, we had this numbered defect, here's the problem, and if this view returns records, then it's happening again, and here's how you fix it. So building into the system ways to educate people that come behind. I mean, I might be gone, and 2 years later somebody goes, what's this inspector thing? Well, then they can read it, run the view, and say, oh, look, it's happening again. Oh, look, there's the solution. Thank you. I like to think of a playbook as a vital tool. And what's interesting about it is, coaches have playbooks. You see them standing on the sidelines in an NFL game, and they got this card, and you got all the signalers that are like, doing and then there's 3 of them, and 2 of them are doing one thing, and then the third one's doing something else. You're like, yeah, okay. But they've got this play card, and they're going, oh, look, it's 3rd down and long. Let's run a pass play. I mean, that's kind of obvious, right? But it's a reference that you go back to. It's a resource. And so my personal one here is a small notebook, label playbook. I love label makers, by the way. But what's in it is all the things that I've talked about. It's situational guidance. When do you use it? Reference material, checklists. I've got a speaking checklist in there. I should read it more often. Questions. What are those powerful questions that you can ask in a certain situation? And I like to use the term KIT. I don't know if anybody ever said this is what it stands for, but I think of it as an acronym of keep it together, meaning that for a particular task, you keep all the things that you need in the place where you need it. So that is the bulk of my material. Does anybody have any thoughts on how you've seen tribal knowledge at work in your teams?
So, question: How do you scale this to large organization that with teams across?
That's a great question. The question is, how do you scale these approaches to large organizations? What I found is a lot of large organizations will have some attempts at this. You'll find a lot of companies with knowledge bases already. ServiceNow has a knowledge base built into it. And the question is, do you utilize that or not? My personal preference is to at least start small with a team, create like a OneNote notebook that everybody starts pouring into, and you can kind of organize it as you go. But if you've got a knowledge base that's available, I encourage people to use those. If there's things that cross team boundaries where you're serving customers and there's some knowledge that would help with that. I was told that in my current client, the ServiceNow knowledge base is the first place where the help desk goes to look for answers when they get a phone call. So that's the perfect place to integrate and kind of link up with the resources that you've been building, is to connect those two. Scale is important. I think that the solutions that you choose have to match the context that you're in, for sure. And it's more than everybody carrying around a journal and a red notebook. I mean, I'm not saying that's going to, like I said, no silver bullets, right? But if we make sure to capture and then curate is another big thing. Has anybody heard of broken window syndrome? The idea that if you see something that's defunct, and then people see that as a pattern, they stop caring because it's like, oh, it's broken, it doesn't matter. So I think that's a big discipline that is important, and curation is somebody needs to champion that, really. And I'm usually the guy on the soapbox saying, let's curate this stuff, you know. Any other questions?
Say you're on a long-running project with a lot of wikis that are hard to use, like you're describing with SharePoint, and people have been working on the project a long time, so there's kind of apathy amongst the team. Do you see anything as like low-hanging fruit that, like small things you could do to maybe make this experience better to implement some of these things?
Yes. The question was, is there any low-hanging fruit that could be picked in a context where there's a lot of kind of junky old stuff and there's apathy? One thing that's great about wikis is that you can build in links to things that don't yet exist. That's just part of the wiki philosophy. So what I usually do is I will go in and create a page that has a most wanted list on it. And it may just be a list of links that don't exist yet, but I'm saying, please, anybody that's going to come in here, I want you to contribute this kind of information. The delete key is a very powerful thing. So sometimes the best thing that you can do is to archive or delete something and, you know, back it up at least. But yeah, I think apathy is tough. Sometimes you got to rearrange the team a little bit to kind of jostle things up. But there are these key points in the lifetime of a project where they are opportunities when there is a mistake, like when there is some kind of outage. Take that as an opportunity to do some capture and do some organization of it. You know, if you keep, anybody heard of Stone Soup, the Stone Soup story? I love that story. These two soldiers come into town and there's a famine going on, and they start knocking on doors saying, hey, we need some food, can you give us some food? And they're like, we only got enough for ourselves. So they come up with this plot, and they put a pot in the middle of the room, or in the middle of the street, and they put some stones in it, and they heat up the water, and they're like, oh man, it's gonna be so good. And somebody walks by, what are you doing? Oh, we're making soup. Oh really, what's in it? Oh, so far it's only stones, but man, if we had some carrots, that would be amazing. And the person's like, well, I got a few carrots. You wanna team up, you know? And so it's this kind of a story telling people, you know, you need to build some momentum, and eventually people start to participate. And participation is key. That's why wikis can be successful, is because participation is enabled by default, right? So the wiki model is very, very helpful. Let's see. Okay, that's my final slide. I thank you. I appreciate your attention. The slides will be available on knowledgeplaybook.com. That's where I've been blogging some of this material. My contact details are there. I'm at Zagronaut on Twitter. I also have the link to the children's book in the slide. It's called Skeeters. Those skeeters are eaters. They bite something fierce. With needles for noses, they poke and they pierce. So it's a fun read. It's a handful of pages, and we had a local Ohio illustrator do it, and it was a big, lots of fun. So thank you for coming. All right, I'm going to pick the 13th person from this corner. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 purple shirt. Come get your checklist manifesto.